institution, which I don't. He's not like in an insane asylum or anything like that. But is he in a mental institution? You'll hear arguments that he's in like a sanitarium for TB, because I think it's on like page 5 or 6. He talks about that's how I practically got TB and all. We don't ever really know for sure. You do know that there's certainly something going on where I'd say it's mental / physical that's happening to him. Someone made the comment yesterday, what has he eaten while he's been in New York City? There's not a whole lot. He's not eating, not getting a lot of sleep. He's sitting outside. He's getting what seems to be like pneumonia from time to time. So certainly his body's kind of weakening as well as his mind would be weakening. But yeah, we don't know exactly how he gets there, when he's going to get out, any of those things. I think we could even debate when is he at like his lowest point, but even that we're not like 100% sure.
Do you get hallucinations with tuberculosis? Because that happens. He does have hallucinations.
See if my invisible ink starts to work. It's working on mine. There we go. I think as like with any illness, it can vary with degrees and stuff like that. My mom didn't get tuberculosis, but she got pneumonia when I was younger. And I specifically remember going to the hospital and she talking about the gargoyles that were coming out of the wall, at which point my dad escorted me out of the room and they brought the doctors in to kind of go over medication and stuff like that. The gargoyles went away eventually after a while, so that was good. But yeah, I mean, if certainly with the seriousness of the illness, yeah, you can get varying degrees of that stuff that can happen. When you say hallucinations, I think I know which scene you're talking about, but which one like kind of comes to mind for you?
There's multiple scenes, but every single time he imagines himself being shot.
Okay. So there's kind of like some unanswered questions about that, and like I think he does have the about being shot, and when he's in like the phone booth a couple times, that kind of keeps coming back. His conversations, can't spell, conversations, bless you, with Alec could kind of border on like hallucination, especially after he leaves Antolini's place and feels like he's starting to kind of like fall in between the pavement and fall through the cracks and disappearing. And to me, that's kind of like when he's probably just about at rock bottom at that point. And I think Phoebe even kind of brings him back up a little bit.
He's talking about getting shot. It plays in his immaturity because it's like him making it. He says he's acting like he is.
Mm-hmm.
He's like making it up like he's not the one.
Does that make it harder to relate to him? Not that before you were going, hey, me and him, we're the same guy. We're buddies. I can see this.
I don't think so because, I mean, at one point, I guess we all kind of like made up little scenarios like that when we were kids. Maybe not exactly like that, it's a little morbid, but...
You don't want to share your morbid scenarios that you came up with when you were little? Okay. Fair enough. So yeah, like kind of, I think maybe the relatability of him is something that does, for some folks, get a little bit of question. And then, Abby, we'll get to you here in a second, because I think you start to see more of the darker side of him, the melancholy, the moroseness kind of take place a little bit in the second part of the book than you do in the first. I think in the first, he's kind of funny. I'm supposed to read this book for school. It swears. And then as you kind of get used to that, maybe see a little bit of a darker side. Does not mean he's a bad guy by any means.
I hate how he never actually got to speak to Jane. Like, because every time he called her, one, like, either her mom or dad would answer, or she just wouldn't answer. And he never actually got to talk to her after her date with,
Straddled her. Warren.
Yeah, he never actually got to like see her like while all this going on, and like we never learned more about her and like what her opinion of him was.
And in some ways, you almost kind of wonder, would any good ever come out of it? Either is he going to be disappointed, or are we going to be disappointed? Oh, she doesn't seem all that great. Making her out to be this absolutely wonderful person, but No, you really don't. I mean, and in the second half of the book, I think the character that you do get to see, that people do tend to kind of appreciate, is more of the Phoebe character that a lot of folks do tend to like. Um, but I think why Phoebe is still okay for us is she's flesh and blood and she's still the kid, where Jane's now kind of transitioning into that whole adulthood. Someone made the comment earlier, you know, and we'll get into purpose with your soapstones and all that kind of stuff in a moment, that maybe one of it is, you know, kind of explaining the fears that there would come of being adulthood and kind of crossing that threshold, and asked, who's afraid of becoming an adult? And just about everyone's hand went up. Who's afraid of becoming an adult? Yeah, just about everyone's hands going up. Why?
Because you have responsibilities.
You don't have any now?
I mean, yeah, but you have more responsibilities. Is that like a higher risk?
You ready to handle that? Okay, fair. Well, that was honest answer.
When you're an adult, you barely have to ask your parents for help. They just like look at you like, come on, get yourself together. You're not a kid. Like now with my family, I'm like, hey, can I have help? And they're like, yeah, sure. Just
That grace period expires,
Yeah.
I guess, after, yeah. I just don't tell my mom that I'm a failure anymore.
You have less people to look over you because you know you're actually not a thing rather than
That's why you're here. You watch over me. But yeah, like you're more on, and again, kind of going with that responsibility, you're on your own. There's not that safety net.
If you like do a bad project in a job, you could get fired, but if you do a bad project here, then you just get a book.
You're fired. Gone. Loss of income. Now you can't support your family. Shame. Your friends won't talk to you anymore. You won't have money anymore. You'll be living in a cardboard box. All because you went with cable instead of DirecTV.
But when you're an adult, it's almost like you kind of just expected to.
How do you know?
know?
You're not an adult. How do you know what I go through every day? I wasn't even listening. What did you say?
I said you're kind of,
You can do that as an adult. You can like tune people out.
you're kind of expected to know how to be already.
Okay. Yeah, there's not like that manual. Still waiting to find that one. So like in those regards, okay, we'll get Ellie's. You already talked.
It's less acceptable to be like really goofy, even if you really need to be.
Especially when you have kids.
It's
They
it's
judge you
like
all the
childish.
time.
It's like,
So, like in that regard, then I think that, and again, not going that we go to the extent maybe that Holden does, but that fear or that concern, that doubt about being an adult, I think is understandable. One of the things in which I really then do feel bad for Holden, where I do think he becomes a tragic character, is there's that fear of adulthood. Well, what do we use to kind of balance that out? The joys of childhood, you know, memories and all that kind of stuff. And then you do think about his childhood. Well, obviously there's Allie. Also in the second part, what other death probably does have a fairly significant impact on him? Jimmy Castle, or the one that Mr. Antolini picks up, and he's even wearing like Holden's sweater at the time. And so that scene where earlier before Maurice beats him up and he looks out the window and he doesn't want to become a spectacle, you kind of get a sense where that could be coming from because of that whole Jimmy Castle thing. So his childhood, not that all of it has been bad by any means, but it doesn't seem like there's those good moments to balance out the bad moments. Where, you know, for those of us fearing it, there's usually at least that something that you can kind of hold on to. And so in that way, I feel bad for him.
I feel like that could also be why, like in the beginning, he was kind of mad at Jane for going out on that date because he knew her like from when they were younger, and he had like that picture of her and like imagining her doing something like that's not her.
Mhm.
Different.
Yeah, and certainly change is the big thing that he has a difficult time dealing with. You know, loving the museum does not change. Jane, the nice thing for him, Phoebe hasn't really kind of changed yet a little bit more. And part of that fear is, what if I'm the one changing? And you know, certainly you are going to go underneath some changes. Not that you're going to turn out exactly like me. Let's hope not. But how many people do I talk to that I graduated high school with? Zero. Change took place. Doesn't mean it's worse, doesn't mean it's better, But, you talk to me when I'm 17, 18, you talk to me now as however old I am, 37. It's different. It's changed. And not knowing what that change is going to be can probably even be scarier. That whole fear of the unknown thing.
I think like it's like Ryan, we like didn't really get to meet Jane like in the book, like actually in real life. But like I think it's kind of good that he didn't get in touch with her because like I feel like if he had like this idea of her in his head, like of what she used to be like, and she was like this support, kind of like this mental support thing for him. And then like if he had talked to her and he was like and she was like different than she used to be, I feel like it would have been worse for him.
Everything could fall apart at that point. Yeah, and I mean, and we certainly do. There are probably memories that all of us have that we still hold on to, that we cherish. And honestly, some of those memories have kind of probably tweaked a little bit over the years. I remember when I was 7 and I was wearing this or that and here and there, and then your parents go, no, that's not the way that it went. Well, shut up. Let me just remember it the way I want to. If you take that safety net away, things will get much, much, much worse. SOAPSTone, because what we want to try to figure out with this is, okay, where does all of this head so far as purpose, idea, what is Salinger trying to get across? I think taking a look at speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, subject, tone kind of helps with that. Remember, for the speaker, we're going with Salinger. It's not Holden. And someone was asking, well, why don't we use Holden for this? Speaker, you tend to go with the author because this is the one who's kind of crafting everything, putting it all together. So when you think about the speaker, why have Holden do stream of consciousness, create these characteristics, where if you focus solely on the character itself, I think you start to kind of discount events, characteristics, things like that of the author that could play a part. So other than going J.D. Salinger, what were like some abstract traits, details, things like that about him that were jumping out? Okay, war veteran. And just to clarify, which war? Okay. I don't remember if I said this to you or not for your class, but Salinger, before he does come home and before he gets married to Sylvia in Germany, he does spend a little bit of time in like a VA hospital because has like a mental breakdown, so to speak. Now, that's not uncommon by any means with everything that he has seen in World War II. In today's, medical practice, the assumption would be that probably would be dealing with PTSD to some extent. I'm going to put later in life for this, simply because initially he is like social, outgoing, all that kind of stuff, and then as that fame builds, he does kind of pull away. He's not the hermit living up in the mountains when he's writing The Catcher in the Rye, but he does kind of start to get that tendency to him as he goes on later in life. Those who were like trying to meet him, big fans, he'd hang out at the post office because a couple times a week he'd come down to the post office, get his mail in Cornish, New Hampshire, and then people would get photographs of him and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, for the most part, reclusive. Okay, so not a fan of formal education by any means. Marina? Okay. So that whole idea of like staying young.
Multiple marriages.
Multiple failed marriages.
Yeah.
He was a Jewish family.
Jewish family. Jewish father, Catholic mother. Okay. So that's pretty good. How about occasion? So like era, when books being crafted, all that kind of stuff.
Christmas.
Like publication. Yeah, the setting of the book would be like Christmas, but
It's during / post World War II.
okay. Give him an elbow. Oops. Post World War II.
1946.
46 is the year that Allie dies. 49, Christmas of 49 is the setting of the book. Publications 51. 46 is when his first short story is when his first short story gets published in New Yorker. I think I mentioned to you one of the chapters from the book is initially supposed to be a short story. That's your reading check quiz was chapter 17, I think, the Sally Hayes date. That's the original short story. It's a slight rebellion off Madison. The events are very similar. It's third-person narrator, so it's not Holden telling you everything, but it still sounds like Holden and whatnot. But the date with Sally is kind of like the beginning point, and then the rest of the book is framed around that. So post-World War II, 1951 is officially when the book gets published. 1950s, I mean, beyond saying post-World War II, what kind of, generation do we associate with 1950s? You know, you hear about millennials and all that kind of stuff. Baby boomers. And so for 1950s, there's a fair amount of prosperity, or at least people kind of think of it as being an economic prosperous time. You have people buying more automobiles, appliances. If you were to go into a home during the 1950s, you would probably go, what boring place is this? But it would look a lot more like 2017 than a home would have probably like in 1941, 1942. So with that, as you get money, as you're able to buy things, how do people kind of tend to become? Maybe greedy. What might be like a not quite so negative, you're a terrible greedy person, you, for wanting to buy something? Okay, a little bit more frivolous. Indulgent. Materialistic consumerism. You're starting to get more of that stuff in the 1950s. Think about a person coming back from World War II, coming back now to a world where people are worried about frivolous things and money and consumerism and material goods, and you've seen basically humanity at its worst within like concentration camps that you've helped liberate. You're probably going to think there's a lot of what kind of people out there? Fake, phonies, you know, that kind of stuff. So I don't think that the tale has to strictly be about, you know, a relatable adolescent maybe kind of dealing with just simply growing up, but, you know, that whole idea of you just don't know what's out there could be kind of universal. I don't know if there's an answer to the question. It's like that chicken and the egg. Is Holden upset because he sees a bunch of phonies? Or does he see a bunch of phonies because he is upset? You know, and so if you're going through a rough patch, you start to view people probably a little bit more critically. Which is it that starts? Don't know for sure. I think I kind of lean more towards he's upset, so therefore he sees a lot of people as being phonies and things like that. Going back to Allie, going back to some of those other experiences, not having your brother with you, things like that. So, in mention to you, you know, the book, I think there are some influences coming from World War II, even though it's not a World War II book. Having a World War II veteran writing about this during an age of when prosperity and consumerism starts to become more important, I think that does become kind of significant. And that's why you do look at the speaker as being the author, not necessarily just a main character in the book. How about audience? We can get some different ones for this one. What do you think, Catherine?
Probably like older teenagers, like 20s and 30s.
Okay, so not necessarily in that teenage era necessarily, but kind of coming out of it.
I said
Angsty teens, not non-angsty teens, only the angsty ones. Okay. Are you an angsty teen?
absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay.
Strict parents.
Do you have strict parents?
Authority figures.
Okay, so it doesn't have to just be parent, but any like authority involving doesn't have to be angsty teens, but over younger or just could any kind of authoritative.
More of over younger
Okay. By the way, I don't want any of you showing up at my house, like at night, knocking on the door, hoping that you can sleep on my couch. Do not do that. Don't do that. Okay.
I'm not too sure. I mean, I think it fits in with maybe alcoholics
How come?
because it kind of like the way he writes about Holden kind of being one. It doesn't really make it look glamorous. Kind of like brings out the darker sides of like
Okay.
alcoholism.
What what's one of the reasons that people will kind of turn to alcohol?
To forget bad memories.
Okay, so it's like a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And so I think even with, which would kind of keep you from having to go into like specifically alcoholics, but you certainly could go with, literally anyone who could be troubled. Doesn't mean it has to be depression or anything like that, but those troubled, maybe kind of like quote unquote lost souls, not knowing where to go. That's a pretty big list we have. That's good. Now, the purpose subject can certainly vary depending upon what that age or that segment of the population is. So I think the purpose for Megan's strict parents, I almost said Colleen, but I held it in, is going to be different from like veterans, that Olaf mentions. If I call him Lisa, then we know we're really in trouble. Could happen. So what purpose / subject do you kind of see? And you can say who this would be like geared toward.
Like more for like the older generation to educate.
Okay. So this could be parents, could be authoritative figures, things like that. And then we're going to kind of combine subject and purpose with this. So what do we want to educate about?
Just like teenagers transitioning to adulthood, essentially. Like their transition into adulthood is different than their child's or other children's.
Mhm.
So it gives some different perspective on it, outlook on it.
And this is pretty significant because, you especially in 1950s, and I know I've said this before, you're dealing with a segment of the population that didn't transition. You just went into adulthood. It's time to deal with it, whether you're dealing with Great Depression, World War II, or whatnot. So you can't empathize with someone, clearly, if you haven't gone through it. And so, yeah, education at that point does become important because you might not know what it's like.
Talking about angsty teens, I think that it like could like comfort teenagers who are like feeling lonely or depressed, to kind of give them something to relate to and like let them know that they're not the only like person feeling this
Okay.
way.
So comfort, can't really put it all in phrase, but the whole idea you're not alone with it, or you're not the only one. Okay, that's good. Olaf.
With veterans, I said relate to their loss.
And I think Aiden's could kind of go with that too, with like the whole troubled souls kind of thing. That unfortunately, probably everyone deals with some kind of loss at some point, and so being able to have a perspective to kind of deal with it certainly can make it more bearable than it was otherwise.
I said, I guess within Holden, maybe if other people can see themselves in him, like it's kind of portrayed, it reveals immaturity.
You said immaturity? So far as these might all be things that people will deal with, handle, but maybe the method that he's going through isn't the good way to go about it, the ideal way. Okay. What do you think for tone? I think early on, after a couple chapters, people go, funny, humorous, and then it might kind of change a little bit.
It's kind of like it's off-putting.
Please pardon the interruption. All students planning on attending the homecoming dance next Saturday, October 14th, must purchase their ticket by this coming Friday, October 6th. Tickets will not be sold after Friday this week. Also, do not forget to have your dance permission form signed and filled out when purchasing your ticket. Reminder, tickets are $20 and will be available to purchase during all
Have to see
lessons
if Kelly's dress is as good as she claims it
and
to be.
Friday.
It is.
If anyone has any questions, please see Mrs. Zimmerman in the Athletics and Activities office. Don't forget to vote for Homecoming King during all lunches. All votes are 25 cents. The winner will be announced at the homecoming dance and will donate all money raised to the charity of his choice. Also, Peak Out t-shirts for the homecoming game next week are still available during all lunches for $5. Attention, seniors. Last day to order senior sweatshirt is Friday, October 6th. Thank you.
Hold on. What do we got? Dismal?
Yes.
Okay. What do you mean by dismal? I mean, I know what dismal means, but
It's like part of the book. It's just talking about how sad he is. I didn't want to say sad because that seems like way too basic and general of a word. But Disney just kind of helps.
so like that kind of melancholy feel that would go along with it. So next week, and next week's going to be kind of fragmented. You know, you don't have school on Monday, come back on Tuesday have TWA, then you have PSATs. We're going to take a look at the prompt. This, I think, is what's going to be helpful to you trying to figure out overall significance, way in which your argument could go. So certainly hold on to that SOAPSTone. I think it'll pay some dividends for us. Mm-hmm.